11 on our series on civility. And every year, Bob asked me, do you think we're done yet? And we're not. We have a great lineup for the spring. We're very, very excited about it. Tonight, there will be Q&A. We have people who are on Zoom, and they might be asking questions as well. So it's going to be a fantastic evening. And I would like to welcome you by introducing Bob Dillenschneider of the Dillenschneider Group, who really, this is his passion and his love and his idea.
Thank you very much, Alice. I'm not sure it's my passion or my love, but this has been going since 2011. And there have been some really fantastic speakers who've been here, really unbelievable people. And there is a lineup of speakers who want to come. So it's pretty terrific, and it's known really throughout the United States and certain parts of the world. So we've been very, very fortunate. As Alice Knapp indicated, and she's been a great supporter of this, we've got some great speakers for the upcoming spring. We're starting with on February 22nd, a man named Andrew Roberts from the UK who won the Pulitzer Prize. And Mr. Roberts has talked about the last king of America, the misunderstood reign of George III. Pretty interesting topic. And we got other people after him. Cyrus Friedheim is going to be here. Really terrific people. We've had people, as you probably know, like Brian Cashman, the head of the Yankees. We've had top politicians. We've had top people in business. But maybe the biggest sellout was with the night we had a member of the Beach Boys. You couldn't get in. And it was really fantastic. So tonight we're very fortunate to have Indra Nooyi with us. Indra Nooyi has published a very important book. And there are copies of the book available in the back of the room when you're through. And I encourage you to read the book. I've read it now twice and underlined it. So it's really worth taking the time to read it. If I took time to list all of Indra Nooyi's accomplishments, we'd be here until 11 o'clock tonight. She is a remarkable person. She came here from India. She came up by her bootstraps every step of the way. She became the head of PepsiCo. She took that company to a new height. She's been involved with organization after organization after organization. Everybody wants Indra Nooyi, and everybody wants her to have her attention and to get her opinion and to get her views. And she's done all of this keeping a balanced life, which a lot of people can't do, as we all know in the room. So Indra, we're really pleased that you're here. We're going to ask you a few questions from here, from the podium, and then maybe a little bit later on, we'll see if people in the audience want to ask you questions. Is that okay?
Perfectly good. And thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me. Can you just lower the volume on this? Thank you. It's either feast or famine. Okay, can you hear me? Okay.
So
I want to say thanks to Bob. I have to tell you, Bob Dillenschneider is one of the most generous people that I've ever met. He reached out to me and said, here, I have a suggestion for the following appearances so you can talk about the book, the contents of the book. He didn't have to do it. He did it because he's a great supporter, he's a great mentor. And Bob, I'm deeply grateful to you for what you do for the state, what you do for civility, and what you've done for me for the book.
Indra, I cannot thank you enough. I can tell you one thing. You were in the green room before when you came in. They said to me, should we have Cokes? I said, I don't think so. Not a very good idea.
That would have been a tough.
But tell us about the book. Tell us why you wrote the book and what the book's about.
Well, when I stepped down from PepsiCo, a few things happened. One, a lot of publishers came to me and said, why don't you write the story of your life? Because there's interest in that. But I swore that I would never write a memoir because I thought it was a vanity project to write a memoir. So I said, no memoir, okay? So I started to write some policy papers. One, because people kept asking me, why don't you replace yourself with a woman? Good question. Made me think a lot. And I thought about my own career. In the final stages, when we had to pick a CEO, there were only men to pick from. But earlier in my career, a lot of women had come up the ranks in PepsiCo, but had left to go run smaller companies. They didn't want to stick around till the top. But then as I dug deeper, I discovered that a lot of women came into the entry levels in PepsiCo. By about the third level, they left because they couldn't balance work and family. They just couldn't. And so they left to do an entrepreneurial venture or work in a less stressful job. In a smaller company, less stress. And those who came to the top didn't want to stick around to run this big company where you travel all the time, you have to work all the time. So that was a problem with the office-going management workers. Then I became a co-chair of Reopen Connecticut. And I saw something else. I saw a lot of our essential workers, especially the caregivers, the nurses, the teachers. They didn't have flexibility. They couldn't work out of home. They had to show up at work every day. And they struggled because when we asked a nurse to come to work, sometimes they had to stay in the hospital for a week or two because they couldn't go home every night for quarantining reasons. And yet we never worried about their children or if they had to care for aging parents. So it occurred to me that at both ends of the spectrum, at the management layers and in the essential worker level, we have an issue with support structures for family builders, family nurturers, people who just care for others. And we had to do something about it. So I wrote a couple of policy papers on this topic. And once again, the publishers came to me and said, yeah, we read your policy paper, not yet published, but it's boring. Nobody, I mean, the policy paper is well written, but if you want it to be sticky and move to action, you have to inform policy through the arc of your life. You have to inform policy through the arc of your life. So, but I don't want to write a memoir. Don't write a memoir the way most people write. Don't write stories. Don't throw people under the bus. Don't do any of that. Use the arc of your life to tell the story. So if you go back to this book, there is not one story in the book where I throw anybody under the bus. There's not one, gossipy stuff in the book. It's all factual. And every chapter has got profound lessons that come from it. Not Indra Nooyi lessons that are super special, lessons that apply to all of us, leading to the final chapters, which are the moonshot that I'd like to focus on. So this is a book that is very minimally memoirish, heavy on policy, but couched in the arc of my life. So I accomplished all thanks to a great writer that I used to work with me.
Indra, you were the first woman to run a Fortune 50 company, the very first one. Can you just talk about that? It must have been a bit of a kick to do that.
I don't know if it was a kick or a fear or a terrified, because it's interesting. I was president of PepsiCo from 2000 to 2006. When you're the president and you're number two, you think you know it all because you're in the room for all decisions that are being made. And my predecessor, Steve Reinemann, and his predecessor, Roger Enrico, included me in everything. So I said, hey, I know this job cold, which is true. But the day you become CEO, it's a whole new job because you're it. Everybody's looking at you. Everybody is looking to see what you're going to do wrong, not what you're doing right. In fact, I remember meeting with a very prominent journalist who said the following to me. He said, Indra, we're going to spend the first year building you up and building you up and building you up. I said, why bother? Why didn't you take us 4 or 5 years to build me up? He said, we need to build you up because the higher we build you, when you fall, it's a bigger fall and it's a better story. You were nodding. In fact, you showed the hand this way. Can you imagine that's how media approaches us? And women in particular get added attention and focus. And me being an immigrant, a person of color, I got even more focus than just women. On top of that, they cast me in the media as this exotic being that wore saris to work, sang, and walked around barefoot, bare feet. I didn't do any of those things. I don't know where they got the story. It is true. After 6 p.m, my feet would hurt from the heels. Nobody's in the office. I'm still working. I'd kick off my heels and I'd go to the coffee machine and come back in a floor that only had 6 or 7 offices. Big deal. And after 6, if I'm exhausted, I might hum a tune. But I didn't spend my day singing and walking around bare feet in a sari. I've never worn a sari to work. So I don't know what they were talking about. So, but at least it sold newspapers and magazines, I guess, that in this exotic being is now running this iconic red, white, and blue PepsiCo.
Indra, you're known for your collaborative style.
Mm.
And you talked about Steve Reineman and Roger Enrico, both of whom were great friends and good people.
Mhm.
Could you just talk about the importance of a collaborative style in business?
It's a skill that is badly needed. I'm not sure many people have it. It's a skill that has to be taught a lot more to leaders. I don't think leaders can do things all by themselves. And you can't accomplish what you have to strictly through command and control. Because at some point, when you just practice command and control, people get turned off. So you've got to convince them, you've got to work with them, you've got to lift them so they can perform better for you. So you can be the boss, but you also have to be an equal. And I remember, right across the street from here, I used to take ballroom dancing lessons. I always wanted to learn ballroom dancing. And I had this young kid from England who was my ballroom dancing teacher. And after the first couple of lessons, he was terribly frustrated with me. I said, John, what's the matter? He said, I'm supposed to lead and you're supposed to follow. And that was sort of an unusual thing for me. And then he said something which I've never forgotten. He said, Mrs. Nooyi, if you learn to follow, you'll be a better leader. This young kid telling me, if you learn to follow, you just might be a better leader. So I think a collaborative style comes when you know when to lead, you know when to follow, you know when to work with others as peers. You have to sort of flex between all those styles.
Andrew, everybody in this room has experienced a moment where somebody else has tried to diminish us or put us down or give us a hard time. I'm sure this happened to you at least once in your career. What did you do when that happened?
Several coping mechanisms. Sometimes early in my career, I'd get mad and I would fume inside, but I was always the only woman in the room. And when you're in the seat of power at the topmost level of a company, you have to learn to control your emotions. So sort of take a break. I'd go to the bathroom, have a good cry, put on my makeup and come back out. Because a lot of the men would use 4-letter words and scream and say, this is whatever. I couldn't do that because I'd become a different sort of a legend in PepsiCo. So my way of giving vent was just to disappear, just sort of shout at myself silently and come back. Later on, I turned all of these things as advantages to my benefit. I'll give you an example. I remember sitting in a room, and I was sort of 1 or 2 levels away from the CEO. I was very, very senior, but I was the only woman. And we were having a meeting, lots of junior people also. But when it came to writing all the action items in the meeting, everybody looked at me and said, obviously, you're going to write it. Why? Just because, the woman was expected to write the action items. For a moment, I was fuming. I said, how can you even think that I should be writing the action items? I said, okay, I'll write it. No problems. I wrote it. When I came back to the office, I said, let me make this an advantage. I wrote the action items beautifully. I took every action item. I gave an explanation of the action item. I put deliverable dates. I put down quality of output required and a preliminary review with me. And I sent it out. People like, where did you come up with these dates? Why is there a preliminary review with you? Because guys, nobody else wrote the action items. And this is what needs to be done in order to move this agenda forward. That was the last time they asked me to write action items. So I think you've got to sit down and say, look, I am completely confident in my skills. You want to put me down and say, write action items? I'm going to convert that to a skill too. And so, personally, I think action item writing is a skill by itself. Some people do it well, others do it perfunctorily. And I just taught them how to make it a skill. So it's all survival and coping skills you have to develop.
Important. Andrew, you've traveled the world, and aside from the United States and, of course, India, is there a favorite spot of yours in the world?
Lots of places. I love Italy, many parts of Italy. You like that? There's a little town right outside of Rome called Orvieto, which I just think is a darling little town. Loved it there. I love France, of course, but if you ask me my one favorite, I'd say it's Italy, southern Italy.
Just returning to the United States, we've got a pretty good machine here in terms of business. Why do you think the United States is so successful versus other parts of the world?
I think the US was the most successful. Other countries are now beginning to catch up. So we have to be careful. The gap between us and others is narrowing, although it's still very, very wide. Why is that? I think the US is the seat of invention, innovation, entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurs watch other entrepreneurs, and you sort of each one pushes each other. Everybody in Silicon Valley wants to create an app or a new technology or something, and how do you monetize it? So they're drunk on inventions and monetizing it. And so the ecosystem attracts the best talent, and it feeds off of each other. And that's why you've got pockets in the country which are innovation hotbeds. I think, Bob, I'll be honest with you, in spite of all the talk, if all the doors of every country are opened, most people will still come to the US even today. Even today. So other countries may be rising, but I don't believe there's another environment, ecosystem, support structure like we have here.
That's a great statement for the United States. Indra, you made many acquisitions. Did those companies come to you? Did you go after the company? What made those acquisitions work? And in particular, tell us about Gatorade.
The Quaker Oats acquisition, which brought in Gatorade. It's interesting. If you look at PepsiCo, we had a sports drink called All Sport. And for you to just have some background, sports drinks are isotonic drinks, which have minerals, which have electrolytes in them. And all the lines we had in PepsiCo at that time either were carbonated or filled aseptically, which is a very expensive process, but they were mostly carbonated. And we manufactured a drink called All Sport, which was also carbonated. But if you drink a carbonated isotonic drink in a situation where you're thirsty, it burns the throat. But we didn't care. That's all we had as technology, so we made All Sport. That was about a 2 share. It never got above 2 or 3% share. So we knew that we had to fill the void in that sports drink category because it was a big growing category. So we always coveted Gatorade. And many years before we actually made the acquisition, we had explored Gatorade, but we are very disciplined on price. So we said, the price was too high at that time, so we walked away. The other reason the whole Quaker Oats company was very interesting to us is because we had no healthy food brand in PepsiCo's portfolio at that time. We wanted to enter the breakfast day part, so we made Fritos bars, Doritos bars, but for some reason they tasted awful, because when you take a division which puts salt and fries everything, sometimes bakes it, and tell them, make a healthy bar with granola, they devolve into figuring out how to put salt in it and fry it. So for a fun for you snacking occasion, it tasted great, but for a good for you breakfast occasion, it was iffy. So we knew we needed a morning brand before 10 o'clock in the morning, which screamed health. And to us, Quaker Oats was the most iconic, healthy morning brand available in the industry. So here was a twofer. You had Quaker Oats and you had Gatorade. So in 99, when they approached us and said, would you like to buy Gatorade? I mean, the Quaker Oats company overall, clearly we were interested. But Roger, who was the CEO then, Steve, who was president, and I was the CFO, we three agreed that we were going to be very disciplined on price. And when they asked too much, we walked away. And it was a tough day when we walked away, because we wanted this business so badly. We'd lusted for it, I'd say, for 5 years. And all of a sudden, we walked away. And then we heard the news that the Red Company down south was going to announce that it's buying it. And, it wasn't a good mood, but discipline on price was important. So those days, there was no Wi-Fi on planes. We land in Westchester and our Blackberries light up. The Red Company's board rejected the deal. And we go, oh my God, they rejected the deal. Why? And what's wrong with them? But then we knew that the CEO of Quaker had to do a deal now, because it was out in the open, right? You have to do a deal, otherwise shareholders are going to be up in arms. And so we waited for the phone to ring. This was just before Thanksgiving in 2019. And the phone rang on the Thanksgiving Friday. And he said, can we do the deal, please? And this is where Roger's brilliance came into play. He said, look, let's do the deal, but let's not try to get it for a much lower price because we want Bob Morrison, the CEO of Quaker Oats, to stay with us. We have to make him feel good about the deal. We've got to have him help us integrate the acquisition. So let's pay exactly what we were going to pay last time in the same terms, and let's not do anything to make Bob feel bad. Talk about a phenomenal negotiating style.
Was Quaker your favorite deal?
Quaker put PepsiCo on the good for you map. And I think it was a very, very important transaction. You know, the deal that I loved was my Sabra hummus deal because it started with Ofra Strauss, who's the head of the Israeli company. I didn't know her at all. She walked into my office one day with a hamper of products, put it on my table, and she said, I just become CEO. She put it on my table and she said, let's both taste products. She brought pita bread and a range of hummus-based products. And in Israel, they have varieties and varieties of it. And every time I ate a little bit, I said, love it, shut the thing, we're sending it to Frito-Lay. So we sent the whole hamper to Frito-Lay, and then we did the deal with them. What a great business that was. That is.
Andrew, we've got a lot of senior people in the room. What would your advice be to a young person who's going to inherit the future in the world and the country? What should they do?
What should the young people do? First, sit at the feet of the older people and learn from them. Learn from them as to what has happened in the world over the past. You know, we've lost this oral tradition where we hand down stories, where we live in multi-generational households and listen to. When I was a kid, I walked 5 miles to school. I hear it from my family, and my kids hear it from my husband. But there's value to those stories because it talks about the tough experiences that the older generation had when there was no technology. It was a different world. My kids would say it was a peaceful world. It was a calmer world. Yes and no. It was also tougher. Listen to their stories. Listen to what they did to build whatever was passed down over the generations. The young people today are extraordinarily smart, extraordinarily brilliant. But I think the time has come for them to take the reins and say, this is our planet. We are inheriting this planet. We know what our elders did. They did a whole lot of good and some not so good, left us with a whole lot of debt and a planet that's in crisis. Rather than wring our hands, let's get together and figure out what needs to get done. So I think they have to start taking ownership for the world.
Andrew, this is a little bit of a zinger, but what is your greatest disappointment? Either personal disappointment or business disappointment? What really didn't work and what did you do about it?
Personal disappointment. I've never said this, but let me say this. You know, after my first daughter was born, I had a series of crises in my life. I was in a terrible car crash. Then I got adult chicken pox, and all of these things happened. And then later on, I had a second child. I would have loved the third child, but I just couldn't because I had all of these crises that happened to me. And I mean, 2 is plenty, but I love kids, I love family. So that might be something that is not a regret, but you sort of look back and say, why did I have the accident? Why did I have the chickenpox? Big deal. Let it go. The one business regret is it was a fantastic project we launched in 2008 called Pepsi Refresh. This was at the peak of the financial crisis. And we spent a lot of money on Super Bowl advertising. PepsiCo spent a lot of money on Super Bowl advertising. And every time we looked around, we saw during the financial crisis, so many communities who were not getting funding, people were in despair, and people write in for small grants. So the marketing guys came to me with an idea. They said, what if we took a piece of that Super Bowl advertising money and put it behind a program which we call Pepsi Refresh? Everything was branded Pepsi, but everybody submits ideas for grants, ranging from $10,000 to $500. And we crowdsource it. Crowdsource the ideas, people vote on it, and the top 10 are then voted on again. And then we give out one $10,000 grant, one $5,000, up to $500 grants. And why don't we do this for a year or two to spend the Super Bowl advertising money that we took out from? I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was timely for the country. And the first grant we gave out, I don't know if it was for $500 or $1,000, was for a bunch of kids with Down syndrome who wanted to be cheerleaders, but nobody would teach them how to be cheerleaders. They had identified somebody who was going to give them lessons in cheerleading. And that program was going to cost either $500 or $1,000. Small change for many people. These kids were struggling. And I remember giving that out as a first grant. I loved it. And then newspapers started writing saying, what is Pepsi doing? What is this waste of money working on these projects? There was a Harvard Business case review. Is Indra Nooyi doing the right thing or is she destroying the brand? Hello, did you even understand the zeitgeist of the country and why we needed to do what we did? And you know what, Bob? Normally with criticism, if I thought it was right, I'd stick by it. This one time after the first year, I dropped Pepsi Refresh. And for years, I regretted that we dropped Pepsi Refresh. I would have liked it to have been a standing program for all the years I was at PepsiCo, because it made such a difference in communities, such a difference.
It was a great idea. Indra, everybody in the room knows that the country simply isn't together right now. There are people on the right, there are people on the left, there are people in the north, people in the south, people everywhere. What can we do in this country, in your mind, to help bring America together, to get us all walking again in the same direction, to capture the strength that the company obviously enjoys?
You know, it's utopian thought, but we all need to get together and elect a president who is centrist and just speaks to all the citizens and really, really, really focuses on, keeping all of the wonderful things about the US and addressing any of the things that divide us. Because the very technologies that we're proud of have also divided us. So we have to figure out how to bring the country back together, focus on the strengths of the country, not just as words, but in action. But it requires a president who leads from the center, who talks to the right, talks to the left. I don't even know what's right and left anymore, Bob. And this is not a plug or a political statement, but in many ways, I think having a president that leads like our governor leads in Connecticut. I mean, he leads from the center, listens to science, brings the state together, and ideologues pull him on both sides. And he just says, hey, stop. I run the state for all of the citizens of Connecticut. Because when I was doing Reopen Connecticut, he was very clear. He said, I don't want any group in Connecticut to feel like we didn't focus on them. Make sure that the plan you guys develop is something that protects all the citizens. And then he said, especially the seniors, because there was some talk about, hey, it only impacts the seniors. We're all going to be okay. And he said, that's exactly, Indra, what I need you to do. Focus on the seniors. Don't let them, be ignored because we're all desperate to open the state very, very fast. So I think you need that sort of a centrist president at the national level, which is very difficult.
It'd be tough to find a person like that.
Bob, if anybody can find that person.
Chris Shays is in the audience tonight. Maybe he's the person. Indra, what's ahead for Indra Nooyi?
Well, I'm busy like hell. I sit on boards. I teach up at the Military Academy in West Point, which I love. Memorial Sloan Kettering, MIT. But really, I want to focus on the next steps on the care infrastructure. So we're trying to figure out what we need to do to determine what is good quality, availability, and affordable childcare. What are the hallmarks of it? And then, shop it around to the state saying, if you want your state to be family friendly, this is what you've got to do. Are you thinking along these lines? Where are you today? What's the gap to where you need to be? And what is it going to cost to bridge the gap? So in our own way, without getting into the politics, we're trying to mobilize at the grassroots level, working with people like New America Foundation, Pivotal that Melinda French is working on, and all of us come together to figure out how to enhance this care infrastructure.
You've been involved with some of the great institutions in the United States, West Point, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and others. Just give us a minute or two about those organizations and why you're involved with them and what they do for everybody in the room.
Well, let me start with the for-profit, then I'll come to the not-for-profit. I sit on the board of Amazon. I think Amazon is the most consequential company of today. I don't think we could have survived the pandemic without Amazon. And I think Amazon saved so many seniors' lives because products were delivered to them. And so I look at the way Amazon operates, the way Amazon innovates, the thinking in Amazon, and I feel pretty good about that company and being on that board. I agreed to sit on the board of Philips, the medical technology company, because I wanted a window into medical technologies and the whole care system, medical care system around the world, because I think it's one big messed up industry and it needs reform. There's a lot of waste in that system, and end to end, there's opportunity to harmonize, streamline, reduce costs, and deliver better care. So I'm learning a lot through Philips. MIT, I did not go to MIT. The president of MIT invited me to sit on the executive committee of MIT. There's about 10 of us. And I have a front row seat to one of the greatest institutions around the world when it comes to engineering and science. The innovation that comes out of MIT, the scientists there, the way they think, oh my God, that's a national treasure, I think. I teach up at the military academy at West Point. I have something called the Class of 1951 chair for the study of leadership. It was a 2-year appointment. They've asked me to stay on a 3rd year, which I'm doing now. And my handle at West Point is #BSNL for life, which is Behavioral Sciences and Leadership for Life, because there's a love affair that I have with everybody at West Point. You know what I'm talking about. I look at those cadets and I say, we can't go to war. These are all my kids, because they're all young children, somebody's kids, young kids, and they're being trained to defend and protect. And you should hear them talk with so much patriotism, so much loyalty. And even the faculty in the leadership department can be deployed at a moment's notice, all the majors, captains, colonels. So I learn from them more than they learn from me. So it's a great experience. Memorial Sloan Kettering, everybody knows, is the greatest cancer research hospital in the world. We had a Sloan Kettering board meeting 2 days ago, and some of the stuff coming down the pike, oh my God, I wish my dad was alive now and didn't die of pancreatic cancer when he did, because there's hope for even those difficult cancers. And then recently I became one of the 5 trustees of the National Gallery of Art. I don't know much about art, but they put me on because I'm pretty good at governance, but I've started to learn art. So they've sent me books and I'm reading and learning about art. And it's a door I haven't opened before. And I am just fascinated.
Indra, years ago, we used to talk about the power of Japan. Now we talk about the power of China. What about the power of India? Could you say something about India and what we should expect from India?
India, a big country, you can't escape the fact that it's got 1.1 billion people, likely 1.3 in the next 5 to 7 years. So India has got the youngest population in the world. If there's a country with a demographic dividend, it's India. India is also a democracy. Democracies can do less, especially young democracies can do less than regimes that are more centrally driven. But I'd rather live in a democracy. I'd rather die in a democracy. Okay, let me be clear. But India is going through all of the issues that democracies go through, except that India has an additional problem, which is there's no language that unites the country. It is a bunch of states that have come together under this umbrella called India. But India has a large pool of English-speaking people, a large pool of scientists, and not too much by way of infrastructure and minerals and those kinds of resources. So I think India will be a big player in the knowledge economy. And whether it's for people within India or exporting talent out, India will always be a major force in the knowledge economy. And I think all of us have to look at India as sort of a strategic country because it's sitting in a region surrounded by a lot of tough enemies around there. It's not the most, it's not a neighborhood of brotherly love out there. So I think it's critically important that, we look at India as a strategic country that needs to be carefully thought through.
Andrew, we've asked all the easy questions. I wonder if there's anybody in the audience that might want a question. If you just raise your hand, we'll
And
try
you
to
must
recognize
speak
you.
into the mic for this because we're on Zoom, or else the folks on Zoom won't hear. And if you're on Zoom, please put your questions in chat. And as I walk to whoever is going to ask the first question, I want to tell you that Barrett Bookstore is here selling your memoir. So if you want a copy after hearing this talk, it's there right in the back.
Two right here. Identify yourself, please.
Hi. Hi, Indra. I'm Priyanka. I'm the founder at Live Green. And in 2018, actually, I moved from India to Chile. And this last quarter, I moved to Boston. So my question for you is, you managed a company at its peak, one of the the most popular iconic brands. What is your one suggestion for the next generation of women leaders?
So let me give you the pros and cons of when I came into corporate America and when I became CEO. When I came into PepsiCo in '94, there were no women CEOs. In 2006, when I became CEO, there were 6 women CEOs. In 2021, there are, I think, 42 women CEOs. It's still, of the Fortune 500, it's still only 8%. So there's still 92% to go. The advice I'd give women leaders is that women is the following. 70% of high school valedictorians are women. More than 50% of college degrees are being gotten by women. More than 50% of professional degrees are gotten by women. MIT graduates 47% women engineers. And in select schools, in the most selective schools rather, women in STEM disciplines are getting almost a whole point of GPA higher than the men. So women represent an incredible talent pool in the country. In fact, I'd say women are the biggest emerging market opportunity right here in the US. So the next few decades should be the decade of women, because if we could somehow support the women to also be family builders, because we need kids too, we would have a potent talent base that could be brought to advance the economy. So if we were to think of this issue as economists, not just feminists, I think people should be bringing women in because they represent a big source of talent. Women in turn have to make their voices heard, have to make sure their proposition is very clear, their competence is clear. And in this world where technologies are changing so rapidly, be a lifelong learner. Because if you don't, you're going to atrophy. So, the playing field is not yet level. I'd like it to be level real fast. I'd like to see Silicon Valley give more funding to women entrepreneurs. 2.3% of funding in Silicon Valley goes to women founders. Something wrong with that picture. So I think men in power need to come to the table and say, why the hell aren't we funding women? Why aren't we pulling up women? Why aren't we promoting women? Why aren't we developing women? So we have a long ways to go, but it's looking better than it did some time ago.
There's a question back here, I think. Yes.
And then there was a question there too. All right.
I come from a finance background, Wall Street, and I do see most women advancing through finance, through the CFO position, as opposed to any other position. So I do feel like we kind of trend that direction, and we are a little bit pigeonholed. So to become a CEO, you usually become a CFO first. You usually go through that. You're not a business person. You're kind of, they open the door to you because you bring a certain level of smarts that they don't have, if I could say.
Mm-hmm.
How do we break that mold?
There are two kinds of CFOs. There's the CFO who has a foot firmly planted in finance and control. And there's a CFO that has, that straddles 3 things: finance and, control, corporate finance, and business. Okay. I think more and more CFOs should start to broaden their area of expertise and involvement to have one foot squarely in the the CFO job, because if you've got the title CFO, that's a gigantic job. But take on projects that take you out of your CFO comfort zone. Take on projects to do with operations. Take on projects to do with doing something very, very different for the company that's strategic. I was a CFO. I was a reluctant CFO. I'll be honest with you. When Roger walked into my office and said, okay, no, Monday you're going to be CFO. I go, I don't want to be CFO. He said, why not? I said, I want to think about it. I've got so much to do as head of strategy. Why do you want me to be CFO? He was going to announce on Monday. I said, I want to think about it. Give me a couple of weeks. On Friday, he walked into my office and I quote him, hey, how's your thinking going? I said, I told you I needed 2 weeks. He looked at me and he said, get your ass into that office. That's how I became CFO. All right. So I was a reluctant CFO, but I did the CFO job well, but I got involved in everything about the company, marketing, operations, sales. I'd go visit customers. And so, it's up to the CFO to figure out how big a mandate they want to write for themselves and get noticed in a way that's not pigeonholed you into the CFO job. Finally, on CFOs, people look at CFOs as the brake. They're the people who stop investments, stop major acquisitions. They look at CFOs as the no person, the cup is half empty person. Okay, you've got to change that dialogue to make it the cup is half full. And you've got to say that I don't want to be the no person all the time, but let me tell you how else we can approach this issue. So that's a responsibility of CFOs. You're not just the risk manager, you're more progressive. That's exactly right. Yeah.
You had a question here in front?
After this question, we'll go to one on Zoom.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Pooja, and I work for Citigroup.
Mhm.
My question to you is, and I'm sorry if it's already mentioned in your book, I'm still reading it, but when you entered the corporate world here in America at that time, there were not a lot of women at the top. Was there an epiphany? Was there a moment in your life when you realized, I got this. I'm better than most of my peers, and there's nothing stopping me now, and I have the talent and the skills and the motivation to go all the way at the top? Was there a moment in your life when you realized that?
I don't think so, because every time you come into a job, I don't know about all of you, I had butterflies in my stomach because remember, at 39, I was head of corporate strategy for a huge company. And I'm like, I hope I don't screw up. I want to make sure that I do the right thing. And not that I didn't have the skills, but I wanted to be able to collaborate with others, build teams, build consensus. You can't command and control in those jobs. You have to do it through convincing people to come to your side. And so I had to learn the businesses ground up. I had kids at home. So I'm like, I hope I do this job well. Then you land as CFO and you go, okay. And it's not CFO and giving up the other job. It is not added to my job. So I'm going, okay, let me make sure I do the CFO job right. And before the ink was dry on CFO, I'm now president and CFO. So I have 16 reports. I have IT, procurement, I have investor relations, everything, tax, treasury, control, the traditional CFO functions. And I have to redo the IT system. So in every point, I'm like, I hope I don't goof up. So I wasn't sitting there going, I'm president now, I can just relax. There wasn't a single moment. And so with power comes responsibility. With responsibility comes a bit of fear. It should. It should. And if you take responsibility too easy and don't have the appropriate level of tummy rumble when you take this on, shame on you, because then you will not treat the job with the gravitas it needs to be treated with.
Alice, before we go to Zoom, could we just ask Chris Shays if he's got a question?
Oh, Chris is here? Oh my goodness. Hello, Chris. How are you? We're talking about you running for president.
Indra, I came from Maryland because of you and Bob. I mean, what a great combination.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Great. What a great contributor to our country.
Well, thank you. I wrestle with the thought that because of the pandemic, we have realized the value of life outside of work and family and so on. And I wonder if we will be able to compete with the rest of the world if we have an attitude, well, we're going to work a little less and enjoy life a little more, when the rest of the world is going to work 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
Oh boy. First of all, just because you work hard doesn't mean everything is peachy. I'll be honest with you. If you look across the world, Chris, in many countries, birth rates have plummeted to very low levels. I think South Korea is the worst. Look at it this way. 2.1 births per family is the right replacement rate. South Korea is at 0.9. Japan is at 1.1. Many European countries are sitting at 1.4, 1.5. You can go to Italy. There are large parts of Italy where there are no young people. I was in Calabria some years ago. Everybody in the town that I was in, one of the towns in Calabria, was above the age of 75 or 80. And there were no young people. That's not a very good thing. And there was a problem with the tap, the pipe broke. They called the plumber. The plumber was about 85. He could barely see. The fact that he's still a plumber, I think, is commendable. But it's not human to get people in the community who are all old to keep that town going. The olive groves were being, ignored. There were 11 churches in the town that I was in. It was down to one, and nobody was attending it. So you need young people to keep communities healthy. If you want to get the birth rate back to where it needs to be, you've got to provide support structures for families to be family builders and family nurturers. And we've got to stop saying that family is female. Family is not female. Family is family. Whatever shape you want, family is much more than just the female. So if we start thinking about that, with all the advances in technology, I think we're at an unusual time in our life where we can actually focus on family as the core of society, but also work around it. Let me give you an example. If we could have a system where people could go home at 3 or 4, take the kids off the school bus, spend some time with them, and then go back to working remotely, that's okay. But if we say, no, everybody has to come to work, you have to be in the office till 8, you go home, and who knows what's going to happen to the kids. What's going to happen is people are going to put off having kids. And worse still, they'll have one kid very late in life, and that's not going to help our birth rate. In the past, we filled the gap with immigration. I'm not sure that's an option we have going forward. And so I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that family is the core of society. For most people, family is the core of society. As we have an aging population, we don't want a loneliness phenomenon to take over everybody's lives. So we need young people to keep everything vibrant and healthy. And the mental stresses on people today, women in particular, is off the chart. So if we want to...
Alice, can we take a Zoom call?
Our question comes from Alexia, who asks, what are traits that you look for in your employees and members of your team? So both, I guess, personal traits and professional traits.
Well, it depends on the level. Across the company, if you're talking about my direct reports, there's some leadership skills, there's some personal characteristics, and then there's domain expertise. We look at each of these in a very multifaceted way. But the one skill we do not compromise is integrity. Do they have a compass that points to true north? Because unlike most of the skills, integrity is a 0 or 100 thing. You can't say so-and-so is 95% integrity. There is nothing like a halfway integrity. So we are very, very keen. I'm talking as if I'm still in PepsiCo. I'm retired, guys. I want you to know. When I was in PepsiCo, we always looked for people with high integrity, a desire to learn, insatiable curiosity, and willing to put the company ahead of everything then. Now I'd say put it on par with families. But people who really cared about the company and wanted to contribute to its success. But then based on the level, we had different domain expertise and personal characteristics and leadership skills that we sort of titrated against.
Alice, another Zoom call?
I hope you live 100 years. But someone on Zoom asked, in the very hours just before your death, what will you say to yourself about the things for which you are most thankful for in your life?
The things I'm most thankful for. I mean, as of today, if I had to write that statement today, I'd say, look, I'm thankful for my family. Again, going back to your point, Chris, I'm thankful for my family. I'm nobody without my family. They are my rock. They're the people that keep me centered. I'm thankful for the family I built and the family I was born in, because that was a lottery of life, being born into a family where the women were as educated, were allowed to be as educated as the men, were pushed, were supported. I'm very thankful to my birth family, and I'm thankful to all the opportunities that the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy have afforded me. And all the mentors that came along the way and pushed me and pulled me and prodded me to strive for higher and higher levels of excellence. So I have a lot to be thankful for and a lot to give thanks to.
Indra, the media have taken some pretty hard shots recently. Are there one or two media people you have confidence in and admire?
Media people I have confidence in.
I think you've answered.
I plead the fifth on this one. That's a no-win question, because they come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes they're wonderful, then all of a sudden they have to write something which gets the headlines. So that's how the thing works today, how advertising works. So I don't blame them. They're all very good people. It's just that the one who writes the article is different from the one who writes a headline. Then you get clicked. You click based on the headline. Then you say, what does the article have to do with the headline? Sort of scratch my head. But I feel sorry for the reporters too.
We've got a question right over here.
Yep.
Hold,
how are you?
please wait for the mic. First of all, we have several back here as well
Okay.
that have been trying to catch my attention.
How are you? My name is Moon Mehta, and I'm an independent executive. I'm actually a product of all women bosses, even my mother here.
Very nice to meet you.
So I've had a great, successful career. I actually work at Arizona Iced Tea, working with the chairman and CEO, Don Voltaggio. It's been a great experience. When you were talking, I learned today a little more. I'm reading your book now, but I learned about your transition from role to role. And I myself have grew myself, I consider like the CEO's son, where you would kind of, start in the mailroom and work every department and get a sense of the total infrastructure. And I was curious to know, like, what did you do to promote your self-growth? Like from one position, it sounded like almost like someone pulled you into those positions, like, hey, today I'm president and now I'm CEO. And, is it something that obviously your performance and your spectacular, results and quantifiable things in the business, but was there something that, because I think, I don't know if I speak for everyone, but that little glass ceiling that's there, or that path that is designed for some and maybe not others, do you feel that you would have some advice or input around how to promote that growth into those various positions? Is there something, I don't know if I'm framing the question.
I tell you what I think I did, but you might want to ask my bosses what I did. I think in every job that I took on, I always redefined my job to be much broader than it was, because I wanted to look at all of the connections that my job had to a lot of other people. So it's not just delivering what I had to deliver, making sure all of the touch points were delivered. So I'd work with all of them to make sure we did it together. It goes back to the collaboration point that Bob raised. I developed a lot of people. I would coach them, train them, pull them up, really make them do the impossible. So people looked at me and said, I'd like to work for her because she trains a lot of people. I had insatiable curiosity. I would read, I would understand the topic on hand. So think of a tea. I'd make that top of the tea as broad as I could, but I'd make whatever I'm focusing on as deep as I could. And so I spent a lot of time reading. But the most important thing is I put my hand up for the toughest assignments. People think that if you put your hand up for an easy assignment and do well, that's how you distinguish yourself. Au contraire. If you put your hand up for the toughest assignment and do well, you're noticed more. I put my hand up for the toughest assignment because somebody had to do it. And even if I didn't get to the right answer or turn the business around, I still did the best anybody could. So these are some of the.
Alice, do you have one more back there?
I have one right here.
Yes, hello. First off, your interest in art, you should be checking out Jan Dillenschneider's paintings. She's great. So
I've seen her
should do that.
catalog of paintings.
Bring it home. But
Absolutely. One day, maybe one of them will hang in the National Gallery of Art, Jan.
I know in the past you've dealt with ecological initiatives. What do you feel like companies should do to further go in that direction? Like obviously with PepsiCo, you're dealing with packaging, manufacture, things of that nature. How can companies continue to say leave less of a carbon imprint in the things they manufacture and the way their products are consumed?
I mean, if you just look at all of the climate change goals, the COP26 or COP27 goals, they're laying out what the roadmap should be. And you've just got to interpret it for your own business and make sure that you proactively put the right steps in now. Right investments. What did we do? We had solar fields in Modesto, Casa Grande, wherever there was a lot of sun, we had huge solar fields that provided the electricity for our plants. And we sold the excess electricity back to the grid. We had water savings initiatives across all of our plants. And in countries where there was enormous water distress, we were not shut down. In fact, we were awarded the Stockholm Water Prize for the water savings initiatives. It saved us costs, it saved us a lot of money, but it also gave us a license to operate in many societies. We had hybrid trucks on the road. We had one of the largest orders for electric trucks. So this is a journey. It cannot happen one day. You take multiple small steps to make change. On plastics, we did our part to lightweight the bottles and put in recycled plastic in the bottles. But there's still many, many municipalities around the country where they don't separate the waste and actually recycle plastics. There's a lot to be done. I think the environmental side is just getting traction with companies because of ESG metrics.
Andrew, there's been an enormous benefit for all of us in this room. We've had 60 minutes of your time. Nobody gets 60 minutes of Indra Nooyi's time. Is there anything you'd like to say in the last minute?
First of all, thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me at the Ferguson Library. Thank you for all you do for this whole subject of civility. And so it's a privilege to be here. Again, I just want to say the book was not written for me. It's not a vanity book for me. I don't get any of the proceeds of the book. It was a book written for us. And the hope is that we somehow put families in the center of our discussion and think about thriving families while not losing our entrepreneurial, inventive, innovative spirit in the country. I'm not suggesting we lose that in any shape or form. I just think we have a unique opportunity to reduce mental stress, mental illnesses, reduce the great resignation. You know, we've talked about the great resignation. We have to move from the great resignation to the great re-enrollment. We've got to find out by slice, why are people leaving? And I think we'll find out that a lot of the women who've left want to work, want the power of the purse, want to contribute to the economy. But they don't have a support structure. I'm just hoping this will open a dialogue on what I think are human issues. They're not political issues. And hopefully we can make some, improvement in this whole area.
Thank you very much for your time, Indra, and thank you all very much for coming here tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.